And that way, those who were unable to join us this evening, and we knew there was a few that had things pop up, they will be able to watch everything we're doing. So first and foremost, be sure to put your questions in the chat box. Remember, you are muted, and the only reason that you should maybe ask to be unmuted, or if you're running behind, if you didn't understand something that we asked or said to do as part of the recipe, don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask that as we're going. If you have specific questions to cast iron and cast iron care and cleaning and all those, start writing those in the chat box as we go to make sure we get to those questions and answer them for you during the course of the program tonight. And make sure that you got all of your stuff. Hopefully you the instructions were set out in emails, and our instructions kind of said prior to class, put this up, because that takes time. And we thought that we're not talking about knife safety tonight. We're talking about cast iron and cooking. And hopefully you caught the knife safety class or something else at some time, and you were able to handle that prior to class. It'll just help things go a little smoother. I think Sherry Broderick said she wanted to do a few commercials before we jump in and get started. But before she does her commercials, if you have not done so yet, the very first thing in our recipe that we're going to be doing, and you can't even see it because of the glare, and I'll tell you how to say that word in a second and tell you a little bit about that dish in a minute. It says preheat our oven to 400 because we are preheating our oven to 400, and that takes a little bit of time for your oven to get up to. If you have not done so yet, go to your oven, turn your oven on 400, and make sure it is preheating to 400, because that is really important for anything that you're doing cooking wise. That's one step Kenna tends to try to rush through. And what you find out is your products don't cook as quick. It takes your oven longer, especially if you're baking, it's not as good for it. So if your recipe says preheat that oven and give it time to preheat. So if you have not done so, everybody go turn on your oven. 400 is the degrees you're preheating it to. Get it going. And then Sherry's going to go over a few commercials. So Sherry, if you want to unspotlight me and spotlight you, and cover a few things that you wanted to talk about before we start the class, I'm going to let you go ahead and do that now.
I had to unmute myself, but yes. So I'm going to put this in the chat box, but the Gallatin County Homemakers, we are hosting a virtual 5K. A virtual 5K is something that you can do at your own pace, on your own time, whenever you can do it on the track. You can do it in Pendleton County, Boone County, or Gallatin County. And it's our main fundraiser for our scholarship fund. If you pre-register using that link that I put in the chat box, the first 100 people will get a cool bag of goodies, and you'll get a t-shirt that has our Peony Festival on it. So it's a real cool, slick little t-shirt that you will get, and all for $10 for the first 100 people. So make sure that you register. Again, it goes to our Homemaker Scholarship Fund, and it's only $10 for it, as long as you register before May 15th and you have the whole month of May to complete the 5K. That's our main thing that we use to, like I said, to fund our scholarship fund is our 5K. And since it's virtual this year, we don't know if we'll have that many participate or that would normally participate. So we are reaching out to ask anybody from any area that wants to. Unfortunately, we don't have the online payment portion. So you would have to submit your payment to the extension office or contact me at the Gallatin County Extension Office, and I can try to work something out with you there too. So, but that's my main commercial.
Okay, so go ahead. I mean, at physical activity, it would have been a beautiful day to do a 5K today. And also watching our newsletters. Diane Mason is also on here tonight. She is the FCS agent in Boone County. She's going to be covering a lot of your answering a lot of your questions as we go through. She's monitoring the chat as we go through the session tonight. So if you saw, she posted and asked that you would please put your first and last name in the chat box so we can make sure we have a pretty good record of who all is here. And that helps us for our events as well. And then we know who to send additional information to as it is needed. It is being recorded. Tomorrow, everyone who is attending the session will be, we will send out the recording link to it in case you want to relook at something somewhere along the line, you want to re-listen to something that somebody says, you will be able to do that as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started so we can get part of our first dish in. I'll give you a little rough outline of how we hope the evening goes, if everything goes as planned. And you know, there's always hiccups to everything that you try to plan. We're going to start with our cheddar butternut squash clafouté. Clafouté is a French word, and trust you me, McKenna said it 10,000 different ways, and she actually wrote down how to say it as well so she would remember, because my brain doesn't work very well. Somehow at middle age, my brain is starting to be overloaded, not forgetting things, just overloaded. So it's called a clafouté, and actually that's a French word. It's usually a French sweet type pastry-like dish. This is a very savory version of it. I found it in a cast iron cooking taste of home book. So that's where this recipe originally came from. And it's definitely a different version that if you would go out and get this at any other place and you say, you had this and you want a clafouté, it's probably going to be more on the dessert line. So this is a savory type dish. So I just want to make sure you know that. But in my opinion, it's kind of almost on the line of a quiche. I made one earlier today, and I actually sent half of it over to my parents already. And I made it in a cast iron skillet like this. This is half of it left. And Ken has been trying really hard not to chow and eat on it because I love it. But I wanted to make it in this dish as well as in this dish, cast iron, that I'm going to cook in. I like cast iron. I like cast iron like this. We'll talk about the differences throughout the course of the night, but mine is porcelain lined, plus it's pretty. And I really like the porcelain line because of the maintenance and care for it. And Kenna, and people that know Kenna and Tony will attest to it and would even agree with this in the comment. I'm a lazy cook, and I'm not saying that the other cast iron needs a lot more care, but I also like having two handles when I'm working with things. So this is my new love of a piece of equipment in my kitchen. So I'm going to start with this. I have put a little bit of olive oil in there to begin with, not a lot. If you don't necessarily have to, because we're going to add the olive oil to our butternut squash. So what I need you to do, and I don't know if you have your butternut squash in a bag like I do. I have my butternut squash in a bag because I cut it earlier. I can tell you, you can cut butternut squash and you can keep it in the refrigerator for a couple of days in a sealed bag. Saves down on your prep time prior to doing this dish or any other dish that you want to do with butternut squash. If you look in Kenna's refrigerator at any given time, there's probably a bag of butternut squash in it. There's probably a bag of butternut squash and cauliflower rice that I have pureed in my, don't ask me why, it's the two loves I really like. So they're always kind of in there. And when I get my butternut squash, I will pretty much cube it up based on the recipes that I'm doing, so I don't have to do it when I'm getting ready to cook the dish. And I think it was Bethany or somebody else when we did the butternut squash soup a while ago that said, I don't like butternut squash soup. And now you're making another butternut dish. I'm really trying to get you to like butternut squash because Kenna likes it. Okay. So with baking, you have to really measure things. With cooking, and you've heard me say this before, you can have a little more give. So what I usually do if I have it in a bag and it says to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil, I put my olive oil on it in the bag. And I guess on about 2 tablespoons. But if you want to measure it out, if you don't have it in a bag and you have it in a bowl, you can dump it in your skillet and do it in that as well. But regardless, you're going to get about 2 tablespoons of olive oil on your squash. I do it in the bag because then I can move it around and make sure it's pretty much coating everything. And you tend to use a little less if you mix it in something like this or in the bowl ahead of time and putting it in your dish. So go ahead, however you want, in your cast iron skillet, dump your butternut squash, or if you have it in a bag like I did because you cut it in advance, add a little bit of your olive oil to it. If you just have it in a bowl, add it to it and mix it around really well. And then I'm going to tip my camera down a little. We're going to put it into your cast iron skillet and or any oven-proof dish that you have that you're using for this.
Kenna,
Yes.
we have a question. Somebody has a 10-inch skillet and a 12 and 7/16 inch skillet. Which better?
The recipe calls for a 12-inch skillet. So if you have a 12-inch, use a 12-inch. If you only have a 10-inch, use a 10-inch.
So use the 12 and 7/16 inch skillet then.
Yes, good question.
And no, you do not receive the same health benefits of cooking with enameled cast iron as traditional.
Correct. Okay. Somebody that's watching people, if they have their cameras on, tell me if I'm ahead, behind. So you got your squash in your skillet. Okay, everybody good? And then that's when our seasonings come. If you follow the recipe, you're putting it in your skillet, you're drizzling it with the olive oil, then you're sprinkling rosemary, thyme, salt, pepper. Here's where you can get creative. You know, it suggests rosemary and thyme because it pairs well with butternut squash. I'm not a huge rosemary fan. I'm a huge garlic fan. You know, so you can put on here whatever kind of seasonings that you kind of like. So I usually take my salt and I just kind of sprinkle it on there. It calls for a half a teaspoon of kosher salt. If you don't have kosher salt, use sea salt, but you're just giving it a little of that salt flavor. So you're sprinkling about a half a teaspoon on it. My go-to seasoning of choice is roasted garlic and herbs. So it has a kind of, not that I'm promoting this brand, but it does have a good mix of herbs in it. So then I'm just slightly sprinkling those on top as well. Or using the measurements that the recipe calls for. If you wish, you can use dry or fresh, whatever you happen to have purchased.
Later.
Okay. And then I like truffles. So I have a seasoning that has some truffles in it. So I'm putting the little truffles on it. It's your dish. You know, you can go stick to where it says rosemary and thyme if that's what you bought. If you have other seasonings you like, add those. Salt and pepper are probably the most important two to try to add. And so I'll sprinkle a little pepper on mine as we go.
Kenna, can you just review that what you're adding the seasoning to?
Okay, so your butternut squash is in your cast iron skillet and or oven-proof skillet that you're using or casserole dish. You have it lightly coated with your olive oil, and then you have sprinkled the top of it with whatever seasoning. The recipe calls for thyme, rosemary, salt, and pepper. I kind of put some garlic mixes on it, so it's whatever kind of seasoning you want. Okay, but the recipe does call for using about a half a teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of ground pepper, some dried, if you're using dried, a half a teaspoon of rosemary or a half a teaspoon of thyme dry, or you're using a teaspoon of fresh. So if you're using it fresh, you're doubling the amount you put on. If you're using dry, you don't have to put as much on. But basically, you're adding a little bit flavor to your squash. Somebody said if you, instead of rosemary, you might want to try oregano. Diane said oregano's good. Italian seasoning I've used before. It's what you kind of like.
Hey,
Or
Kenneth,
like.
do you like using the dried or do you like using the fresh, or does it matter to you?
If I have my herbs up in my garden and I can use fresh, I use fresh. If I'll use dry most of the time personally, because I don't usually have fresh on hand as much. So is everybody to this point? After you're to this point, the next step is really super simple. We're putting it in the oven. The recipe says we're putting it in that 400-degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes. Now, this becomes again a different like. If some people like their vegetables a little more al dente than others. I tend to like to roast my vegetables at least 25 to 30 minutes, but you're going to have to find what's a good fit for you. So we're going to stick them in for at least that 20 minutes. We might find out 25 minutes might be a little better, but you're going to put this in the oven, middle rack, 400 degrees, and then just let it roast away. And what I'm going to encourage you to do when we take this out, and I'll tell you a little bit more for those who say, I don't like butternut squash, eat it just this way. You could take this out and it's a good side, just as it is, before we make the rest of the dish with it. And this is Kenna's most favorite way to eat it. Roast it just like this, take it out and eat it. Okay, so we're putting it in the oven. Everybody ready? In the oven it goes. Diane made a quick comment, or somebody had asked in the comments about the health benefits of porcelain lined compared to the cast iron. Diane, do you want to cover that at all before we go on to Sherry?
I did already.
Okay, just making sure. All right, so the next step, while this is kind of hanging and waiting and roasting in our oven, Sherry's going to walk us through a little bit of the chocolate chip cookie recipe.
Someone had a quick question about the butternut squash cooked ahead. Wasn't the butternut squash cooked ahead? I don't think it should have
The
been.
butternut squash was not cooked ahead, but I will tell you, I don't think you can really mess up this dish because I have tried it multiple different ways. I have a big meal always after church on Sunday for my whole family. Okay, so in order to want it quick to the table as possible, I have cooked my butternut squash before I went to church. Then when I got home, I heated it up just a tad in the microwave because you want it warm when you put it back on your egg part we're going to make later. And it's turned out just the same. So if you want to take steps and you have more time on one day to prepare, or you're using different things, you can always cook it ahead. It's just when we get to the next part, it wants to be a little warm. Today, we hadn't cooked it. We cut it up ahead of time. And so now we're getting ready to cook it. If you had already cooked it and it's tender and ready to go, just hang tight till we get to the next step. Does that answer that question? Okay.
I think so. So what I'm going to talk about is the cookie recipe. And I had been trying to find, and I told me guys this story, a cookie recipe that would go in perfectly in our little skillets, but it would either overflow the skillet, it would it just never worked. It would only call for half an egg, that type of stuff. So I had a coworker who said, just use the bag mix. So that's what we're using tonight. We're using the chocolate chip cookie bag mix, just showing you that you can use normal products in a cast iron skillet to make it look a little bit fancier, and just to be able to use some of your cast iron that you have. So everyone that is from Gallatin County should have received one of these little cast iron skillets. What I have done, I have already just buttered my cast iron skillet. I just rub some, if you have any Crisco, or if you have it calls for half a stick of butter. So you can use the other butter and just sort of just coat the inside of your cast iron skillet. I don't always know if is that something that you necessarily always have to do with cast iron, Kenna or Diane? It's just something that I typically do when I use cast iron. I don't know if you have to, but especially with these little skillets that you have, they've never been used before unless you've used them, but they say that they're pre-seasoned, so they should be good to go for tonight. So first step, go ahead, line your pan with some butter or some Crisco. And I had already said that you're going to need a half a stick of butter. Diane just said if you don't coat it with some type of fat, the cookie will stick. So yes, so you
Usually, if you make a recipe that's high in fat already, you may not need to coat your pan with fat. But if you're using a recipe that doesn't have a lot of fat in it, you probably do need to put some type of oil or shortening or fat into the the pan before you make the recipe, whether your pan is seasoned or not.
So the cookie mix, I'm just following some of the directions on the cookie mix. It calls for a half a stick of butter or margarine, and you would want it softened. So if you have not, if your butter or margarine, if you're like me, like Kenna sometimes forgets to turn the oven on to preheat, I always tend to forget to soften my butter. So a good trick that you can do is just put it in the microwave on defrost for a couple seconds to try to make sure that it isn't you don't want it to be melted. So I have some softened butter and I'm just going to mix in with my mix here. So pretty simple, pretty easy. And the next thing that you're going to want to do, the recipe calls for a tablespoon of water. I've needed to use 2 tablespoons of water. So go ahead and put your mix and your butter and your 2 tablespoons of water and just mix all 3 of those ingredients until it's smooth. So I'm going to put some water in this and I'll be right back.
So if you've forgotten to soften your butter, I think it was one of the other cooking things that we had done. They had suggested that you take like a glass container. I was looking for one. So if I would take this, put some water in it, heat it up in the microwave, get this hot, then dump that hot water out and then dome that butter, it will help soften it quicker. So if you're using real butter, it takes a little longer to soften, but that was a trick that I believe Chef Allison showed us in one of her presentations, that you can like get this hot with some hot water and then dome it, and it'll help soften that butter a little quicker.
All I'm doing, I'm just mixing up those ingredients. So I'm just like you guys at home, just mixing up those 3 things until it's all smooth. Once you get it all smooth, I'm just going to put it over into my cast iron skillet. Now, if you have a different size cast iron skillet than what we have with the 6-inch, yours may not have as tall of a side. You may not want to use your whole mix, your whole bag of mix, because it may be too full and it may overflow in your oven, and I don't want you to do that. So if you have a different cast iron skillet that may not be as thick, this one is still pretty thick, but I think I have another one. Hold on. If you're using something like this, then it will definitely maybe overflow into your oven. And so I would only put about 3/4 or half into your skillet, but you'll see with mine too on how much it should look like. So once it's all smooth and mixed up and you have already buttered or coated the inside of your skillet, just go ahead and put your mixture into your skillet. If you have a favorite cookie recipe, you can do this with that favorite cookie recipe. Again, you just want to make sure that you put in the right amount, because when I was going through recipes, I've overflowed my skillet, and like I said, it makes sort of a mess. So I don't want you to do that. So you just wanted it to be about halfway into your skillet. That way you're on the safe side as well. So again, you can use it with any of your cookie recipe that you have. We're just using the bag mix to practice tonight. Do we have any? I see that there was a question as far as, yeah, Diane answered, do not coat the outside of your pan, just the just the inside where your food's going to be.
Yep.
Any other questions? That's pretty simple. That's all that we have for the cookie recipe. So it goes into the oven at 350 or 375. I've cooked it at 350 and I would wait, or 375, I'm sorry. I cooked it at 375 for 10 minutes. And it's not going to be done after 10 minutes, but I'm just one of those, I'm always afraid it's going to overflow or it's going to burn. So I check it after 10 minutes and then I cook it again for another 5 minutes. And again, your oven may be different. So I cook it for another 5 minutes and check it. And then another couple minutes after that. So it usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes to cook. I have one that's already done. And I will give you a tip. I made this the other day with my son and he went to grab it and the cast iron was still hot. He didn't think it would still be hot, but it is still hot. So make sure even after you get it out of the oven and it sits for a little while, it's still going to be hot. So you don't want to burn yourself. So make sure you use an oven mitt or something of that nature. I think that they have some little actual oven mitts that go onto your skillet handles that you can use too. So just be careful, even after it's in the oven, then it will still be hot after it sits for a while.
Yep.
But
Diane Mason is showing you a handle. I don't know where mine's at, but sometimes they make silicone ones that go onto your cast iron that you can actually cook in as well. And it makes it nice.
so, especially for presentation, you just would add a couple scoops of ice cream on this. And then you would have your dessert for 2 or your dessert for 1 if you're really hungry. But it's the cast iron cookie for 2.
Got a lot of people still mixing.
We'll use a few minutes to catch up mixing. And then once we can look at everybody's video or we get a thumbs up from you or a smile from you saying you're good, what we might do so we can get your cookie cooking as well. It is recommended that, you roast your vegetables at like a 400-degree oven, but we could probably turn that down to like 375 so we could put our cookies in there with the squash at the same time. And your squash will still get roasted because 375 is still pretty high. But most of the time, if you're roasting vegetables, it's about a 400-degree oven. So once we get everybody with a thumbs up or something that says they're good and ready, we'll turn our ovens down a little bit and you can stick that cookie in if you want to cook it at the same time. If you just want to wait and cook it later after the whole other dish is done, that's good as well too. It's kind of up to you, but if you want to try to cook both at the same time, we could turn our ovens down a little bit.
Sherry, somebody did ask, explain the 375 or 350 again.
So it's basically it's just the temperature that it calls for on the bag mix. I've done it at 350 and I've done it at 375. So I've cooked it for 10 minutes and it's not going to be done, but I like to check it after 10 minutes because if the cookie, if for some reason you did put too much cookie in cookie mix into your skillet, you will be able to see if it's going to overflow and you'd want to catch it so that way you don't have a big mess in your oven. So I would put it in for 10 minutes and then check it to make sure, no cookie had overflowed, everything's still good, and then cook it for an additional 5 minutes. And then some people, and after that, it's for your own preference. Some people like a more well-done cookie. Some people like the cookies that are gooey. So again, that's on your personal preference. But yes, 375, cook it for 10 minutes, check it, and then cook it for an additional 5 minutes, and then another for your preference. Mm-hmm. And like Diane said, it is okay to sit it aside and just let it wait till later too, so it won't hurt the cookie.
Honey. Those people heard you, honey.
And some people on the bag mix, since we didn't use an egg, they may think that, well, this is safe to eat since it doesn't have an egg in it. But it does say do not eat the raw cookie dough. So we can't be eating the raw cookie dough. And a lot of times that comes because of the flour in addition to just the eggs so don't eat the raw cookie dough.
Somebody said too late.
Uh-oh.
That goes for any kind of raw mix or even like anything you're doing with flour. It's even any kind of raw mix. And the reason why I want to like emphasize that there's a lot of recipes that even call for raw mix. Like there's some dips that you put a cake mix in and you mix Cool Whip and different things with it. That's still nothing that from an extension standpoint we would ever recommend because all of those mixes need to be baked prior to any of us consuming them.
And so Diane made a good point. So if you have any cookie dough that's left over, or if you were going to be using one of your cookie dough recipes that you have, just go ahead and make a couple extra cookies with your cookie dough. So you don't ever want to waste your cookie dough. So make sure that you go ahead. And if you, for some reason, you don't want to use it right now, go ahead and make it into cookie sizes and just pop those in the freezer. So that way, when you do want fresh cookies, you can get those out as well.
Yep. So if everybody's kind of ready and you want to put your oven down a little bit and stick your cookies in, you can. Hopefully you hear your squash in there sizzling. I think we need our squash to go at least another close to 15 minutes to get to the temperature we would want it to be, or the where we would like it to be to finish the rest of our recipe. So if you want to put your cookie in now, go ahead and do that. Set your own timer. Start it for 10 minutes. What Kenna tends to forget to do is set timers, and then you don't know how long it's been in there. Timers are your best friend. Set it. I always set it when I'm doing baking for the least amount of time and then add, because you can always cook more. You can't cook less once it's done. So if you want to stick that in the oven, you may go ahead, and then maybe we'll just we'll chat for a little bit on cast iron cooking. I don't see many videos. Maybe I'm missing. Nobody likes to be seen when you're cooking. You just want to see us. So we're going to trust that you are doing well, right? So I'm going to stop spotlighting Sherry, I think, if I can. I don't know how to do that. Let me find you. Sherry, can you stop spotlighting yourself and put us all up?
Yeah, I think I'm unspotlighted. I'm already unspotlighted. So
yeah, somebody said their squash just was in for 15 minutes. It's still hard as a rock. I told you, like, now mind you, we're going to cook it for another 35 minutes later, but I still like mine to go at least 25, close to 30 minutes. So we will. All right. So I have a quick question, and you can write this in the chat box if you want. How many of you like cooking in cast iron? How many of you have been like a faithful cast iron cooker for a long time and cast iron doesn't scare you, and you are always, it's your skillet you go to?
I have a question in the chat box about how long to roast, Kenna.
How long to roast?
Yeah, the 50, just didn't catch the last bit. You usually cook it 20 minutes before adding the rest of the stuff.
It says that, but I will leave mine in the oven till I can stick a fork in it when I'm roasting it. Not like mush it like you're going to make mashed potatoes with it, but a fork will go into it easily. And I have found that is going to take on a 400-degree oven close to 25, 30 minutes based on how your oven heats. That's my preference.
Part of it is also how long your oven preheated.
Correct.
Cold skillet into a cold oven, it's going to take longer.
Yeah.
Cast iron is not known for heating well, it's known for holding heat well. So it sort of heats unevenly just because of the way the cast iron's made. But once it's hot, it holds heat incredibly well. And just like Sherry said, the cast iron was hot even after it had sat for a little bit. In normal pans, you might have thought would have been cooled off.
See a lot of people saying how much they love cooking with cast iron, and I've seen some people like, not so much. So I think it's either you like it or you don't like it type thing.
Somebody asked if it's safe for glass tops, Diane.
You can use cast iron on glass top. The challenge is that you can't act, I call it act like a chef, where you shake the pan around. So if you're going to put it on a glass top, you need to let it sit and you need to pick it up and move it. Because if you scrape it across the glass top, you're likely to scratch the glass top, especially non-enameled cast iron, because it usually has little bumps and ridges on it. The other thing about glass tops is, you may not be able to see this. This pan is really crusty and rusty. It has a very flat surface. Some of them have a ring around the edge. And if you have one that has a ring around it, like this one, this will not make full contact with the glass cooktop, because this ring is going to keep it sitting up just above that burner. So just be aware of that too. If you have a flat one, you probably do a lot better.
Hey, Diane, can you talk a little bit about seasoning cast iron and how you do it?
Sure, I think everybody gets obsessed with that. Most cast iron we buy these days, cast iron, sorry, I keep moving my computer around. Most cast iron we buy today is already pre-seasoned. That doesn't mean that it doesn't need some type of fat in it. It just means that it's going to be more non-stick than not pre-seasoned. So if you cook with things that are high in fat, they usually recommend that you make like a good fat, greasy hamburger or bacon or something that's usually high fat the first few times you use it, or coat it really well with a neutral oil or fat. And then after you get done washing or after you get done cooking, don't let it soak in the water. Just clean it with, just scrub it out with water. Or if you need to use soap, you can use soap. There's nothing wrong with that. Just get a soft bristle brush, or even they even make these scrapers you can use to scrape any bits and pieces out. Dry it really well. You can always put it back on the burner to heat it, to get it warm, and make sure that it's totally dry, or you can put it in the oven to make sure it's totally dry. And then take about a 1/4 teaspoon of oil, neutral oil, like a coconut oil or neutral oil, and just spread it all the way around on the inside. You can also do it on the outside, but generally the inside's the part that's not going to get seasoned. If it totally gets messed up and looks something like this, my light in this office is nasty. This is really rusted on the inside. You can't tell it. I can take this, and the first thing I would do with it, it's got a lot of crust and rust on the outside is what I call it. I would put this, I'd either try to scrub it with a double-aught steel wool or a scratchy of some sort, or I can put it in my oven if I have a self-cleaning oven, and put it in the oven and use the self-clean mode, and that probably would get a lot of this off. And then I'll take and coat it with oil, put it in the oven. I'll turn it upside down and put it in the oven at 350 degrees for an hour, and I put aluminum foil on the bottom rack, put this on the rack above it, 350 degrees for an hour, turn off the oven and let it sit until it cools completely. And that will get me started back on the seasoning path. And I may have to do that a couple times, but you want to avoid sticky. You just need to have a little bit. It just needs to have a nice sheen on it.
So if it's something that, if your cast iron skillet is starting to rust, you're able to save it then?
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with rust. Usually take I'd start out with just like a green scratchy to try to get the rust off, or like salt or Bonami or something to get the majority of rust off. Put a little bit of, they recommend coconut oil or some type of, or shortening, and then heat it, and you should get back on the road to having a seasoned cast iron
That
piece.
was the little scraper and scrubber like that you had.
Just helps get, like if you burn something up, well, you're not gonna burn anything, right? It just helps scrape food off. So it's got like it's like an ice scraper, but it's not ice scraper. And it will just help you get rid of any pieces that get burned on. When that cookie that you're making tonight sticks, not that I've ever had that happen. And it will especially stick if you don't take it out of the pan when you should.
Diane, that's plastic, yes, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can use metal. You can use metal utensils on cast iron. There's nothing wrong with that.
So if somebody has like your scrapers that you use to clean pots and pans, that's what, like those plastic things you can purchase almost anywhere. Or
Or you can use the metal like they use in restaurants, the stainless steel scratchers. You can use a metal spatula. It's cast iron. You're not going to hurt it.
somebody
you're not
asked
gonna-
me what causes it to turn black?
It's the oxidate, or it's just the oil turning, because we've overheated it, we've high heated it. We want that to polymerize, if that would be a good word. And everybody's afraid of using soap and water. You don't put it in, like you never put your cast iron in the dishwasher. That's not the goal. You just want to wash it. I always call it wash it while it's wet. So when I get done using it, I'm going to clean it out. I'm not going to let it sit for 2 or 3 days because if I have acidic food, it's going to eat through and cause problems. So just go ahead and take a paper towel, wipe out the big parts. If it looks good, you don't even have to wash it. If you want to, you can take water and scrub it, or add a little soap if you really get concerned about it. Simple scrub brush. If you want to scrub it, rinse it out, put it on the burner, get it hot again, or put it back in the oven. If you've baked something, your oven's probably still hot and you can just stick it back in the oven. And yes, somebody said that their great aunts threw theirs in the bonfire every year. That's a high enough heat that's going to do that. It's kind of this thing as using the self-cleaning oven. But if you just put that in the oven, it's not going to get hot enough to burn off all the old nastiness that's on it. And I bought that skillet that I just showed you. I bought that on purpose.
Now you see a lot, like especially, 127 yard sailing and stuff like that. You see a lot of skillets, old cast iron skillets that look really rough like that. And I've heard that there's certain brands to always look on the bottom, that you have to look for a certain brand. Can you tell us if there's which ones do we need to look for so we can find our diamond in the rough? So which ones are worth a lot of money, Diane?
Well, it's funny you asked that because I went on eBay right before this class because I was curious. And Griswold is a brand and Wagner is another brand. Those are the two older brands that most people talk about. They were both made in America. One was made in Pennsylvania and one was made in Ohio, Sydney, Ohio. And some of them are selling for $20 on eBay. And some were up to $400 or $500. And I will just say it's worth what you can get for it if you're looking to sell something. And most of us who have, the 8 or 9 inch, I have my mother's, it's a Wagner, and they're a dime a dozen on eBay. And they're not a dime, but you get my point. They're very readily available on eBay. So they aren't as rare. Now, there were some things on there that you probably had never seen before that you may find out in the old barn that,
So you're saying that we're not going to get rich by finding any cast iron at the yard sale?
Probably not. Only because those people have already looked on eBay to see what things, and they're not selling it if it's worth 500 million, you know? And I'll tell you, I'm looking to help clean out my mother's house. She's still alive, but, and it's not a fear, but we always joke. It's like, I don't want to take something and give it to Goodwill and then see it show up at Antiques Roadshow. That's my big thing. And it's the same thing with the Route 27 yard sale. Nobody wants to sell it and then see them, 3 months later on Antiques Roadshow. And somebody said it's not the skillet, it's the shipping. Yes. And on eBay, it said right on there, shipping's like $40 or whatever. So you can pay $20 for a skillet, $40 for shipping, and you could have gone to wherever and purchased a brand new one, for the same price. And I have seen them on sale. There are more manufacturers than Lodge. Lodge is built in Tennessee, South Pittsfield, Tennessee. They do offer factory tours. And then there are some other manufacturers that have started up relatively recently in America. So there's more than one American manufacturer.
All right, guys, if you're ready, and we'll move on to more cast iron skillet questions. All of our squash should be about done. So if you would like to just get it out of the oven, even if you think it's not, I promise you, if it's been in that oven at 400 for as long as we've been talking, it's going to be done. Enough for the next step. And it's going to look about like this, almost like it looked when it came in. And this is where Kenneth says she could just eat it right out of here. What you're going to do once you get it out of your oven is you're going to find a bowl that you feel like you can put hot stuff in, because we're going to use that same skillet for the rest of our recipe. So you're going to, I scoop out because one, my strength in my arms is not like it used to be. And then it gets awkward and I burnt myself too many times trying to dump out of a cast iron skillet. So I will just take a spoon and I'm going to spoon out all of the squash out of my pan. So I'm just spooning it out, putting it into this bowl. So if you want to go ahead and find whatever you want to put it in, you're going to do that. Sorry, I didn't move it closer, but I didn't have a hot pad over there and I didn't want to just sit it on the counter. Because remember, Diane said cast iron takes a long time to heat up, but once it's hot, boy, it stays hot. Okay. Then I just set it somewhere where that's going to stay hot. And if you just put that on your stove somewhere, it's going to stay hot enough. One thing Diane mentioned too is that it takes a long time to heat up. Sometimes you can help that process if you're cooking. Some recipes will even tell you, put it in the oven, heat it up. I don't know if you can see it, but have you ever watched those cooking things? All the good stuff's left on the bottom. Okay. So this recipe calls for putting a tablespoon of butter into your cast iron skillet. And
Interrupt real quick.
Yes.
Sherry, when they take the cookie out, do they need to leave it in the pan or take it out of the pan?
I leave it in the pan. I know that I was going to mention earlier that you had said that it sticks on you, but I haven't had it stick on me. So the one that I cooked earlier, I cooked it, I don't know, about 5 o'clock, and it's still in the pan. And I just now gave myself a little slice, and that's what I'm snacking on right now. So I just leave it in there. And like I said, if you want to add some ice cream on top of it or let it cool a little bit and present it like this, you can. But Diane said that she's had it stick on her. So you just want to trial and error tonight. If it sticks, you use one of those plastic scrapers and you know to take it out next time.
It sticks also because you may not have had it coated well enough on the inside.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the more you use it, the more you bake in it, the more you season it, the less it's probably going to stick. So I put my tablespoon of butter in here. It says put it back in the oven, but you're going to see this is hot enough to melt it. But I do want to try to keep it warm. So I'm going to set it back on the top of my stove. I will tell you, as your butter melts, if you take that scraper, even like Diane showed you before, or whatever kind you have, and you just kind of scrape a little bit gently on the bottom to scrape up all that good stuff. That's where all your flavoring is. And it's gonna, and once you got that butter melted a little in there, it's gonna loosen it up a little. You can scrape it and then still leave your butter in it. And that's just adding some of that flavoring to what we're gonna be adding to it. So I'm gonna set this back on my stove because my stove tends to get hot when my oven's on 400, especially on the back burners. So that'll keep that pan hot. It'll also keep my squash hot because it's on there. We're gonna go to the next step in the recipe. So I have myself a bowl that I'm gonna put the rest of my ingredients in. And this is almost like a quiche in a sense, or how I feel it as is like a quiche. So in a large bowl, we're gonna take 4 eggs. So I'm gonna just take 4 eggs. So get your eggs. Don't crack them on the side of the bowl. You've heard me say this 100 times. Crack them someplace else. Then put them in here. Then discard your shells. I'm not good enough to crack with one hand. I used to be when I worked in the restaurant, but that life has changed. My hands don't work as well. So you're cracking 4 eggs. Putting them, disposing those shells after you do it. The chef showed us once that if you got a piece of the shell into what you're cracking, the shell almost acts like a magnet. So you can take a piece of the shell to scoop out what you might have cracked into it. I usually, after I do that, wash my hands. That's just me, because that's just what I do. And then I'm gonna take my whisk and I'm gonna whisk my 4 eggs to start with. Most recipes, if you have eggs in it, it's best to whisk them up prior to adding everything else because it mixes everything else together better. The next ingredient on a recipe is a 1.5 cups of milk. It says 2%. 2% is never found in Kenna's refrigerator. I can never figure out which way. Everything's opposite. Whoop. I'm using 1%. Somebody asked me that earlier when they picked up their stuff. I don't think you can mess up. You can use whole milk. You can use 1%. You could probably use skim. You're putting 1.5 cups into it. I have not tried it, so don't ask me, but I would assume you possibly could use it with almond milk or some kind of milk substitute as well, as long as. So I'm putting 1.5 cups. I'm using a liquid measurer. 1.5 cups into there. Whisking it a little more to mix it together. After you do that, you're adding 1/2 cup of flour. If you watch, we do a Cooking Through the Calendar segment each month. If you were on, some of my county might have been on the thing on hot cross buns. We really talked about when you're baking, the importance of measuring flour. And it's important, like using a scale. And I do a really good demo. So on second Tuesday of the month, you can watch Cooking Through the Calendar when we do the pancake mix for this month. When you're doing something like this, it's not as precise, but especially if you're baking, it can make a big difference on what your cup of flour is compared to my cup of flour if you're just scooping it out the way we've always been taught. So then I'm mixing all that flour in. Might be a little clumpy, but by the time you mix it all in and you add your other ingredients, it will be good.
Kenna, is it a cup or 1/2 cup?
It is 1/2 cup. Sorry. I
Okay.
said a cup on how we were doing it, but it is.
Okay.
I had 1/4 cup in my bag, so I put 2 1/4 cups in it. You should have. Calls for white cheddar. in Pendleton County, even tried to pre-order it. We couldn't get white cheddar. If you got white cheddar, I'm happy for you if you purchased your own, but you can't not, you're just putting the sharp cheddar cheese in it. It's more color and appearance wise with the white. So everybody that in Pendleton County that got cheese in their bag, some of you had to get your own ingredients. You might have got white cheddar, but regardless, you're putting in 2 cups worth. And most bags are 2 cups worth. So we're gonna put this whole bag worth in.
Yeah, I had looked for the white cheddar as well, but it only came in a 6-ounce bag, which was not going to be 2 cups. Only the 8-ounce bags were 2 cups. So Gallatin County people, you got yellow, or you got the regular cheese too.
I'll tell you, I have never made it with anything but yellow sharp. I love white cheddar. I like white sharp cheddar, but it's just not as easy to find. And sometimes someday I'll make it with that. So I have
They're
my,
asking about the cayenne pepper.
okay, I haven't got there yet. Be patient. Okay, so I've added the flour, I've added the cheese. I know that was above it. I always add my seasoning last, so sorry if I'm not quite going in order. Next, I'm gonna put my 1/4 cup. People ask, where do I find the Parmesan Romano cheese blend? You can just use regular Parmesan cheese. It's not really that important as long as it's some kind of Parmesan cheese, but they do sell the dish I made earlier. I used the rest of that kind. This is what I bought locally. So this is what I'm using. And you add in about a 1/4 cup. And this is Kenna's about a 1/4 cup. Like I say, you have a little more give when you're cooking than you do if you're baking. If I was actually baking, I would measure that precisely. But in my opinion, when it comes to cheese, you can never have too much cheese. Okay, so in this so far, I have 4 eggs, 1.5 cups of milk, 1/2 cup of flour. I have my cheeses. And now you can add cayenne pepper. If you don't like cayenne pepper, don't add cayenne pepper. Kenna's favorite ingredient to add to almost any recipe she does, if I can find it, is smoked paprika. It's my seasoning of choice. So I'm gonna put smoked paprika in mine. If you have cayenne pepper, put a little cayenne pepper in it. If you can put both in it. And you're just putting a little bit. You're adding about 1/4 teaspoon. And then you're mixing it. So remember, this is your dish. You're afraid it might be spicy if you add it. You're not really adding enough. You're just adding a little bit for flavor. So that's all here, all mixed together. I'll bring my cast iron skillet back over with my pot holders. I remind myself of that because I picked it up before without it. And let me just tell you, it's hot. So my butter's melted in there. And I'm adding my egg mixture back in. Scraping it out of my bowl. It's in the dish. To that, then I'm going to top it with my squash. Now remember I told you Kenna could eat it just this way. If you think you do not like butternut squash, I encourage you to take a bite of it just like this, because you'll be making it as a side dish all the time. So I'm just going to put it back on top. Spread it out as evenly as you can. Sorry, my dog's barking. Somebody might be outside. Okay, butternut squash mixed on the top. I don't want to pick it up or move it around too much, but hopefully you can see that. I hope I have it angled in a way that it's at least visible enough to see it's just kind of tossed in there on top. The next thing it says, you're going to roast it. You can sprinkle it with a little bit of green onions or chives. So I cut up some green onions because I don't have chives. I did not go to my mother to get chives. That was my intention today, but I had green onions in there. And I like onions. I'm going to sprinkle the top of it with a little bit of green onions. And then we're going to stick it back in the oven. So it's going back in the oven for 30 to 35 minutes. So it's like if you've ever made a quiche or any other kind of egg dish, you're going to put it back into the oven to a knife or something inserted in it will come out without anything sticking on it. So it will be kind of firm. And it's going back in that same oven, 400-degree oven. On the same middle shelf, in the middle of your oven, back in. And when it comes out, I can pick this up now because it's cooled down enough. It's going to look like it's full, not like this exactly, because, you know, I gave half of it away already. It should cut and serve in slices, just like a quiche would. Okay. And it's going to look more like a quiche consistency. Kenna's favorite part is the crunchy outside. Just saying. That's why I really like it in the cast iron skillet. You're going to get that better, crispier crunch when it's done in the cast iron as opposed into a casserole dish.
Hey, Kenna, you had a question. Do I add the oil that's in the dish that was holding my squash? So like the bowl, you could have had some oil. Do you add that back in?
Well, you're just going to put it on top. So if a little of it goes in with it, it's going in with it. If you had a lot of oil in it, you might have put too much oil on your squash, possibly. My bowl, I didn't scrape it all out, but once I got all mine out, can't really tell. It's pretty dry in there. There's nothing left in there that way wise. So I just kind of spooned it on top. But sometimes depending on how yours cooked and how much oil you had on it, you might have a little. You do not have to put that excess oil back into it. Just kind of sprinkle it on the top. And I probably have made this like 10 times since I found this recipe. I feel like you could add other things besides squash to the top of it. Haven't tried it that way yet. I think you could maybe do spinach. You could maybe do sweet potatoes roasted, some other vegetables that you might like roasted, add it back to the top of it as well.
So if they're using a 10-inch skillet, they do not need to put all of that into their 10-inch skillet. They need.
Yeah, you don't want to overflow it. You know, that well, it will not come out and over, most likely, but it will take longer to cook the thicker it is. So yours might be thicker than mine based on your skillet size, but I would still make sure you're about 1/4 inch at least from the top, maybe closer, a little, you know, closer to 1/2 inch from the top, just to make sure that nothing is going over. And
Question about freeze-dried chives or green onion tops. Freeze-dried chives instead of fresh.
you can use, yes, you could use that if you want. You can use dried. You don't have to put them on it or at all if you don't want to, because that's also a personal preference. Depending on who I'm making it to, I'd probably leave them off. I have some in my family that feel like if it has any kind of onion on it, they guarantee they don't think they're going to like it. They don't like chives or the flavor. I think chives have a little stronger flavor than the scallion tops or the green onion tops. But that's just what I had. And I like onions. Onions and cheese. Can't have too much. Onions, garlic, and cheese. Can't have too much of any of it. But that's Kenna.
I got chives out of my garden today.
I know my intention was to go to my mom's and get them out of hers, but I forgot. So, anywho, I don't know if we will totally be here still, so make sure you set your timer for your 30 minutes. Remember, I always say set it for the least amount of time and then go back and check. And we still might be here. We might have a lot of questions that people have to ask.
So it would need to be when it goes, when the,
It goes back in what'd you say, Sherry?
the temperature on your oven, it needs to, your cookie should be close. It should be done by now. If it's not done, it should be close to being done if you put your cookie in the oven earlier. So the oven should be back at 400 to cook the rest of your, say the recipe name.
Clafoutis. Clafoutis. Yeah, you're going to turn it back up to 400 when you put it back in. So if your cookie's out and everything, put your oven back up at 400. And if you're like Kenna and you like it a little bit crunchy on the outside, right at the end, I'll put it up to like 425 just to get a little more crunch to it. But I like that. There are people that don't like that. You know, there's people that are the inside of the brownie eater and the outside of the brownie eater. It becomes a preference. But you will need to put the oven back up to 400 if you had turned it down a little bit. You can roast at 375. It'll just take a little longer. But for cooking this recipe, I would make sure you're back up to 400 when you put it back in with the eggs. The eggs will puff up a little bit when they're cooking, and then when you take it out, yep, they will deflate some. Diane had posted that as well in the chat box. How many of you tried the squash just as it was out of the oven and liked it?
I see some hands that were raised up.
Hope you did.
And the cookie recipe is the same way. It will sort of deflate, like the eggs will, it will sort of deflate after you take it out of the oven too. So, oh, I had a question. This could be for Kenna or for Diane or anyone on here. So I say you have some cast iron, and Diane talked about this a little bit too, I think, but say it was like your grandmother's and she didn't really use it. It was just on the wall, but you just decided that, you know, you want to use that, even though you're not sure she ever did use it. It was more of display. Like you can still use that. It's not just display, right? Oh, Diane, you're muted.
Cast iron was made to be used. The more you use it, the better it gets. The more you use it, the more non-stick it becomes. The more you use it, the easier it is for you to pick it up and run with it. So get it out, use it. There were some comments in the chat box that some cast iron from other countries may be problematic. That's true. They don't have the same manufacturing standards that we have. So I don't have any recommendation on brands or anything with that, but just be aware that if you do go to a store or you do go and buy some things at a yard sale or whatever, you don't know where it might be from. And some of the old cast iron made in America isn't marked, even though you think it is, or it's been rubbed out. The other way is you can take sandpaper. A lot of people complain about bumpy cast iron. You can take sandpaper and sand it down. You don't have to. There's nothing hurting it. It's just some people don't like the bumpy. It's just from the manufacturing process and the pre-seasoning process. So bumpy's not bad.
And that was a question that somebody had asked me when they picked up their bag, the little cast iron skillet. It is that you got in your bag. It was a little bit rough on the bottom, and they're like, do I need to sandpaper this? And I'm like, no, just it should be fine. Well, how does it get smooth? And I said, well, I guess after you use it a lot, it will get smooth. So
those bumps will start filling in as you add fat, and it bakes in and creates that surface. If you do go out and try to buy used, just kind of be aware. Some people kind of take a look at it. Some people will try to spray paint their cast iron black to cover up any flaws that might be in it because they know it's not a good skillet. So if you see something that looks like it's been painted, either parts of it or all of it, just kind of be aware that somebody's probably trying to sell you something that you probably don't want. And you certainly don't want paint in your cooking.
What happens if you do purchase something that's been spray painted like that?
That's what you're going to put on the wall.
Paint something else in it and make it a craft.
Yes, yes. But cast iron really was meant to be used. The other thing about cast iron is typically you don't have to put it on high heat. You can usually cook with it on medium heat because once it gets hot, it's going to hold that heat and it's going to cook really well. So you really don't want to put it on a screaming hot oven, on a screaming hot burner. There are some people who will sandblast their cast iron to clean it, and that helps remove any of the finish on it, and then they have to go back and re-season it. As a general rule, unless you just really abuse it, you really shouldn't have to season it from the start. You should be able to maintain the seasoning that's on it and just build on it. You really shouldn't be abusing it so badly that you have to do something with it.
Hey, Megan.
Real quickly. Yes, some people use salt. It's fine. Soap and water's fine. Scratchy pad's fine. This is an enamel top. If you ever see one that is chipped, there is no going back from chipped cast iron. And I called Lodge, and they do not recommend that you use chipped cast iron, chipped enameled, because the enamel can continue to chip and get into your food. So if you have a chipped pot, it just became a flower pot. Give someone with a cookie that looks wiggly in the middle and doesn't need to cook longer. It's wiggly in the middle.
Yeah, if it's still wiggly, I would say, yeah. Again, that's sort of on your personal preference too, if you like it more well done or not, or gooier. But to me, I would probably want it to be cooked a little bit more.
Part of that's going to go back to oven temperature. If you left it in at the 400 degrees or your oven and was at 400, it's going to start cooking from the outside. Part of it depends on the depth of the cookie too. So just kind of keep those things in mind. If you had a little bit thicker cookie and you had a 400-degree oven, you're going to cook that outer rim before you get to the middle. So
There was a question about how long you should leave it in the skillet. I left mine in the skillet until the next day, until I ate it all. And so it's really, in my opinion, it's until it's gone, until you eat it all. Other people, it may stick in your skillet and you may want to get it out while it's still a little bit warm, not while it's too hot, but while it's warm, you may want to just try to dump it over onto a plate or try to use 2 forks and lift it out into where it would be on a plate for you. So that way it wouldn't stick into your skillet. But
one of the things, like if you remember Diane said, cast iron holds heat really well. Even if you took that cookie out, it'll still be cooking a little bit once it's out. It'll get a little firmer in the center. So if you're like me and you really don't want an overcooked cookie, I would take it out when it's a little less, not runny or super mushy in the middle or gooey, but it will still cook because that's going to hold heat for a while, especially if you leave it in that pan.
Yeah.
That makes sense some. It's kind of like when you bring your meat into rest, it's still going to cook and cook up a little bit more up to temperature. Your cookie's going to do the same, and especially since it's in cast iron, because it's going to hold its heat.
like I said, I cooked this one earlier around 5 o'clock, and my cast iron skillet, it's not hot anymore. Obviously, I'm holding it in my hands, but it's still, the cookie's still warm, so it holds the heat.
Mine is delicious.
With a scoop of ice cream on top.
Oh, it's
Chocolate
just good
chip.
with a
Should be
spoon.
good. So,
Someone also said that be careful running cold water on your hot skillet. That's not only for cast iron. If you do that with regular pans, you'll warp the pans. If you put a really hot pan in cold water, you'll warp the pan and you can't get it unwarped. With a hot cast iron skillet, you want to avoid extreme temperature changes. So just set it aside, let it cool down some, and then wash it in with the water. Don't just throw it right into cold water to try to get it cooled down. Her granddaughter did it and the skillet split right down the middle. It was an older skillet, belonged to our grandmother. And again, it could have been, who knows where it was manufactured or how it was manufactured, or it may have just been used so much that the or abused so much that the metal got weak and it gave up when it went into that cold water. How do you store cast iron? Growing up, our skillet was always stored in the oven, but it was used daily. Yes, and they recommend store it on top of the stove so that you remember to just use it all the time. Otherwise, make sure that you have it clean and dry. Dry is the most important part. And then store it someplace where it can get some air circulating around it and not be near moisture. So if you need to put it in like a cool, dry place, you want to avoid extreme temperatures. So I wouldn't put mine out in the garage because I get really cold in the winter and I get really hot in the summer. And so all the sweat and everything may happen. So try to pick a cabinet. I tend to try to avoid setting it on things that I don't want oil to transfer onto. So I wouldn't just, I'd probably put it on something because I don't want that, any type of grease or oil on my cabinets. That's just my own little picky thing right now. A little obsessed with that.
All right, guys, now's your time. Ask a question if you have any questions that you've been dying to know about cast iron. My timer says my squash has about 20 minutes and we don't have to hang here until our squash is done. We've done other classes before, like our hot cross buns where they finish cooking and finish baking afterwards. And we just say, send us pictures because we want to see your finished product, but we're here. So if you have questions that, you know, that you're wanting to know, there's no silly question. So ask away.
Sherry, there's a cookie question. It's not wiggly anymore, but it fingerprints. Should it?
I would take it out.
Yeah, if Kenna was making it, it should fingerprint and take it out. But, you know, it's so easy. And I have a tendency, and you know, you have to learn by the more you do it and the more you bake cookies. It's like a fine time. 1 minute longer could be too long and 1 minute less could be too late. But it's almost as if you have to figure out that time for you. But definitely you can overcook a cookie pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then it can be crunchy. So
With the cookies, like I said, these were just the, you know, dollar bag mix. They have them in sugar cookie, peanut butter cookie. So if you're having people over and you want to impress them, it's just a dollar bag mix. And just make it in the cast iron skillet. Again, if you have a favorite grandmother recipe that, you know, like mine always made a white chocolate oatmeal cookie. If I wanted to try that in the cast iron skillet, you can put any cookie mix in there. So it just, you would want to make sure you fill it halfway up to where it doesn't overflow in your oven because it makes a mess. I did it.
Diane, did you answer the question on cast iron? All right, she had heard oil can rancid on cast iron.
I'm going to answer the one prior to that first.
Okay, sorry, I did.
Campfire cooking and cast iron, do you use it differently at all? So number one, I would not use enameled cast iron on a campfire. Number two, you don't want to put it into the flame. If you're going to, you can set it on the coals, but not on the flame. If you're going to set it right down in the coals. A lot of times if you buy campfire cooking recipe books and cast iron, it will, if you're going to use charcoal, it will tell you how many coals it takes to heat up to the bottom. And then you usually put them on the lid also. If you're using a Dutch oven, which this is a Dutch oven cast iron, a lot of times this one has a flat bottom on it, but if you're going to buy one to use in the campfire, they have little legs on them. There's usually like 3 legs to keep them up off the dirt, I guess would be the best way to say it. And then on the top, I don't really want to take this out of the, well, it's heavy. That's the thing about cast iron with me. It's just heavy. So this one, you'll see it has these little, I call them little spikes in the lid. So the lid goes on the pot this way, but you can also put the lid on it this way to add coals. Charcoals on top to give you heat from both sides. So some recipes will call from heat from the bottom, some will call for heat from the top, and some will call for heat from both. So again, the recipe for if you get really into camping with it, you can do it that way. This also has a metal, it's called a bale, and you'll either find wood or metal. So if I knew I was gonna use this in the campfire, I'd look one with the metal so that I don't burn the wood off of it. It just gives you a nice handle for it. So you just put your food in there, put you can do pretty much anything in it. Eggs, meatloaf, bread. You can make bread in cast iron. It's all kinds of things you can make. I also, this is in mine. This is parchment paper that is all folded up. If you unfold it, it fits right down into this. And so I can make bread in my cast iron without the bread actually touching the cast iron. And then I can just pull this out and my bread comes right out. So you could have done that with the cookie, is to line your pan with parchment paper, make your cookie, take it out. It makes cleanup a whole lot easier. You don't get the benefit of iron contact, but you get the benefit of using cast iron. So you get the benefit of the heat and all of those types of things by doing that. So you can use parchment paper. Oh, I've got all kinds of stuff in there. Oh, it was there.
What is we say it's good for us, but what are the other, what is the main benefit of having the iron?
Well, you've heard of iron poor blood. It's a big thing. It helps with our red blood cells and oxygen transfer, but you can also get too much iron. So they used to recommend that people cook in iron to get iron into their system. But we stopped doing that and we get iron from other foods. We now have iron fortified bread and iron fortified cereals and things like that. If you're pregnant, you're probably taking an iron supplement anyway. So I hope that helped with the campfire cookie.
There are still a lot of, and several of you are females on here, there are still a lot of us that are iron deficient. So it does kind of another way of trying to get a little more iron in.
And if you make acidic foods like pineapple upside down cake or tomato sauce or chili, those types of things, you're going to get more iron imparted into the food from the cast iron than, say, your cookie. Your cookie's not an acidic food necessarily, but pineapple upside down cake, which is a classic cast iron skillet recipe, that acid. Always heard about oil going rancid on cast iron. Can I explain? So oil, if you've ever smelled bad oil or bad butter or tasted it, you will know what we're talking about. Oil goes rancid. It gets old and goes rancid from air exposure. And so if you use a cooking oil like an olive oil or a canola oil or really any kind of oil, and you don't use your skillet often, then you risk having that oil go bad. It tastes off. It has an off odor and an off flavor. And so that's why they try to get you to use something that won't necessarily go bad, or to use your skillet more often. And you shouldn't have so much on there that it's going to cause problems anyway. Hot cross buns are a bread product that are traditional around the Easter holiday. Kenny,
That was a class
explain
that
better?
Kenna
Yeah,
had. She had a hot bun. She had a
Right.
rabbit
And
roll
I
class.
did it more just because they're made with yeast and we wanted to discuss some baking with yeast and stuff as well. So it seemed like a good thing to do right before Good Friday. Traditionally, it's served on Good Friday and you put a cross on the top of it. So it's kind of like a sweeter roll. But we did it more to talk about cooking with yeast and quick rise yeast. And so, but that's what it is.
And the cross on it is icing.
Icing, yes. So it's a sweeter
It's like a sweet roll.
for Good Friday.
Other ideas for the little one, like scrambled eggs. Any other ideas for using the little skillet?
could
Somebody
really-
said mini quiches, that would be a good thing. You could do the eggs with spinach and other things added to it. Those are quick things that come to mind. Other things with the little skillet, if you're cooking for one, it might be the perfect size to do one piece of chicken or one piece of whatever you pork chop, if your pork chop fit in it that you want to do. cooking for yourself. It's almost that perfect size for cooking for fun.
Make a little loaf of focaccia bread for one.
Yes.
Use the recipe for one. Newer porcelain skillets can you use metal turners. The enameled skillet, you can use a metal turner, but you're going to leave a mark. So it's best to use nylon or plastic turners and spoons and that type thing. Wooden, yes.
Yeah, my favorite are my bamboo ones. But
Yeah, but you can use metal on the regular cast iron.
but what I'm learning from Diane, I can't do anything to hurt my cast iron that I can't fix. Right? That's what I'm learning.
Mhm.
Shouldn't be afraid
You're
of it.
just going to get really mean and nasty with it.
Right.
So Diane, just to sort of recap, I know you talked about this earlier. I don't know if you can see me, but I have a pan that has some of that gunk on the side of it. I think it was Jacob's grandma's and we've ended up with it. To get that gunk off there, I can put it in my oven and do the self-cleaning. Oh,
I'd start with that, or I'd start with the scratch pad.
okay.
Depends on what the gunk is. The gunk on mine, since I bought it at a antique store, I have no idea what the gunk is. It's from campfire cooking. It looks like ashes and just general buildup from campfire cooking. So if I just took like a scraper or a scratchy, I could probably get the majority of it off with just water and a scratchy.
And it has a little bit of rust right up here as well. I can just sort of oil that up again and
Oil that up, put it in the oven at 350 for an hour and
I bought one at a flea market a few years ago and it had a buildup. It looked like they hadn't washed it of food and stuff. And I had my husband start a fire in our fire pit because somebody told me to do that. And I put it in there for probably, I don't know, an hour or so. And it cleaned it up just perfect.
you have the enough to melt off all of the oil with the gunk on it. I mean, that's really all you're doing is you're getting it so hot that that's going to start melting out.
Mhm.
And someone had mentioned in the comments that they leave the crust on. So it's okay to use it with the crust on, right?
It's being protective. It's not hurting anything. It just looks awful. And mine, I just don't store it anywhere where I'm going to knock it off and get it on stuff. You can make bread in the Dutch oven. That's what I have a great recipe that has a really good crusty bread in the Dutch oven and it's wonderful. And again, I use those liners just because I move the bread dough from where it rises into the really hot Dutch oven. You preheat the Dutch oven and you put that in.
This is
It's
my
a lot of-
second favorite piece of equipment, my Dutch oven, but porcelain lined. I just haven't got the anything. It's kind of like everything else, like pieces of equipment in your kitchen. And we talk about this all the time in some of our other classes. You have your go-to pieces you use for certain things. We saw some people say, I always make my cornbread in my cast iron skillet. So you have your cast iron skillet that we tend to always use for the same thing. I have my Dutch oven that I always use for the same thing. I have my electric pressure cooker that I always use for the same things. And my slow cooker that I always use for the same things. So what we hope with some of the classes that we do when we try different recipes in it, we're stretching your use of that piece of equipment that you might have to try something different that you don't always try. We did give you a cast iron cookbook. I did in the bag that we passed out. I can make sure that's attached to emails that we sent out. It did have some good recipes in it. I think it might have came from you originally, Diane. It came from another extension office.
I'll also show you this. If your cast iron came with these little pot protectors, you want to save those if you can, because that's going to keep the lid up off of the pan so that A, it doesn't chip, and B, it lets air circulate and lets odors keep from building up. If you have a Dutch oven, you can do that with. You can also buy these kits, and I'm not promoting Lodge at all, it just happens to be what I have. And this is a seasoning spray and a scrub brush and a silicone handle and the scraper. And I also have this other, this is another seasoning oil, and it's made with palm oil, organic coconut oil, sunflower oil, and vitamin E and citric acid. So this is just another type of thing. I was reading online just a little while ago, and they're recommending coconut oil for some reason. So you can buy refined coconut oil that doesn't have the odor or the flavor of coconut and use it. That would be considered, and it's generally solid at room temperature, so you can put it on there and kind of control where you put it. I would not use like a cooking spray. Those have a propellant in them that will cause problems. So try to stick with an oil like a canola oil or a grapeseed oil or something like that, just a plain oil.
So this was the, it's called Healthy Cast Iron Cooking. So I'll make sure that in emails that I send out, and maybe Diana and Sherry will do the same, we might include some of these recipes that came from University of Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I will say they're not all healthy.
I was going to say the same thing. The first one I opened up and it's like, well, they're recipes, but I would not consider them healthy.
I would take the word healthy off of it.
We were reading that, and I was reading that at the office today, and I'm like, let's see. But anyway, that it does have some good recipes in it. It has a cabbage recipe in it that I really want to try in my cast iron as well. I like Taste of Home books. I have this cast iron Taste of Home. I'm not promoting that cookbook over any other ones, but I've usually found recipes in there, been tested and tried enough that I trust using them. That's where this recipe we're doing tonight came from, and it was a little different. They also take normal recipes and try to do a little twist to them. However, I made a few recipes in here, like the cast iron pizza that I was dying to try, and I didn't like it. And it takes a lot for Kenna not to like pizza, so.
I'll also say that if you season your cast iron and you put it in the oven, like we talked about for the hour, make sure that you run your oven fan, your exhaust fan, because you will stink up the house with the oil and everything getting hot and burning on. So if you run your self-cleaning oven, make sure you run your fan too.
Heather, we'll make sure that I will make sure that PDF is sent to Sherry, and she can send it out in an email attachment as well for those who might want it. And as always, you can always call our offices and ask for certain things if we forget. Somebody says, can squash be frozen? Kenna's answer is yes. I usually blanch it a few minutes first and then freeze it like I would anything else. But I've also just froze it if I was going to use it quick. Diane, do you have a better answer than Kenna's?
I would blanch it if I was going to freeze it.
Yeah. If I know I'm going to use it in the next couple of days, I sometimes don't. But if I am storing it and keeping it, and I do blanch it. And when we say blanch, it doesn't take long. It'd be like if you were freezing any other vegetables, they always recommend you blanch it first. Make sure.
And also go ahead and cook it.
Bag.
You can cook it and mash it and use it to make pumpkin pie.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll probably like it better than pumpkin in your pumpkin pie.
I grow butternut squash and acorn squash. It is easy. When it's a winter vegetable, you can grow it and then you can store it in a cool, dark place and it'll stay. I mean, I'm still pulling out butternut squashes from last year. Hopefully they last until mine come in this year.
It does make an awesome soup, and you can freeze that soup too. So remember people to know how to know when it's done.
How to know when our quiche, our whatever clafouti is done. I have on my timer, if you put it in about the same time I did, about 2 more minutes. So what I would do is I open up my oven. I take a knife. You can take anything that you usually test things with. It is an egg product, so you want it to be firm in the middle. And so I kind of like put it in the center of it, and if it comes out clean and it's not mushy, because you don't want it mushy like the cookie, it's pretty much done. And mine at 30 minutes could actually be coming out of the oven at this right at this moment. Now, I will remind you that Kenna says she likes it crunchy and crispy. So I tend to leave mine in a little bit longer. But usually I've made this several times right about the 30-minute mark. It's pretty much done. If it's on that 400 oven, you actually have an oven that cooks close to that same temperature, and all ovens cook differently, but you want to make sure that your egg is not runny. Now it will set a little more. That's why it says you take it out and let it sit for about 15 minutes. And then it'll finish cooking. It'll cook a little more even while it's sitting. So if I would take mine out right now, this is what it's looking like. And you would just test it. Find out from yours, just like make sure it's not runny, your egg is cooked. It's going to keep going. But usually every time I have made this, right about the 30-minute mark, it is done and ready to go. And that's what it looks like in my pan sitting there.
Someone said there's just still bubbling around the edges, and my question to them is it bubbling because it's the eggs bubbling, or is it the fat bubbling around
the fat
the
will
edges?
bubble, and the fat will bubble when it comes out, and that's what's making it nice and crunchy on the outside. And whether this makes a difference or not, you know, Kenna said she made this one earlier because I wanted to make it in this skillet as well as my porcelain line. My porcelain line tends to make it a little more crunchier on the outside. Not sure why. Don't have a good reason for that. Makes me happy.
Remind people what you use to test it.
Do I?
Knife. Cold knife.
You want to use a knife, you can use, some people have like anything. That's my timer for it, so I didn't remember not to check it. So I'm just like putting my knife in, pulling it out, and making sure nothing. It's kind of like if you're baking a cake, whatever you would test your cake with, you can even touch it a little bit. You just don't want it to be runny. And and if you can go like this and it's not jiggling, it's good to go. And it smells delicious and it looks delicious. It is supposed to sit. I will tell you, I've dug into it earlier than the 15 minutes. The thing with the 15 minutes is it's going to help it cut better. It's kind of like lasagna. You finish lasagna and you're ready to eat it. But if you let the lasagna sit, it's going to cut and make a prettier presentation for you when you serve it. If your cast iron is seasoned well, it should come out.
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, that looks yummy.
Thank you. But how's everybody else's doing? Are they almost done?
Well, you're a little ahead of us, but we're getting there.
Yeah. So it's.
We had to do work to catch up.
So, and it's going to be a little brown around the edges. I find, and maybe you find different because of the way they're seasoned and what's in them, you tend to get those. That's why I kind of likes to cook in them a little bit, because I like the crunchy edges in some of the things I'm cooking.
I see some that are done and they're showing them in their cameras. Like Sandy's looked
Take
good.
me off. I'm going to take me off spotlight so I can see everybody's. How do I get everybody? How do we go back? View, gallery view. There we go. Ooh, look at it.
You switched your rugs?
Yeah.
Looking good. Did anybody make it in a casserole? And not in a cast iron? I'm trying to see. I thought I saw somebody making it in a casserole. Somebody texted me and said they put potatoes on top instead of the butter squash. Nicole made hers in a casserole. Hopefully it should turn out just the same. It's like making any other egg bake. Oh, looks good, Nicole. Looks good. So that's kind of what we had for this evening. Hopefully we answered all the questions you want to know. Somebody keeps saying they're hot. Well, even tell you what, 400-degree oven sitting next to you, take things out that holds heat. Yeah, Megan, it's hot. You know, I think you and I are probably close to the same age, so we're probably more hot than some of the others on here. So yeah, it is a little hot in the kitchen tonight.
I always tease my mom about taking these classes at Billy's house because she doesn't want to mess up her kitchen. So I'm going to go to Billy's house and try to season this pan and her self-cleaning oven.
There
So I
you
don't
go.
clean up my kitchen.
And then you need to go over to her house so you can eat the
Yeah.
what? Clafouti that they made. So, any other questions? Any other thoughts? Hopefully you have 2 dishes that turned out wonderfully for you. I will tell you that we will be sending out evaluations. So if you have taken any of our cooking classes, this one, other ones, Sherry and I have done multiple. Some of them from Boone County have joined us for several of them. If we have your email, you're getting an evaluation, okay? And what we need you to do is complete that evaluation because we want to know the benefits that are coming from these classes. There'll be questions based on what classes you have taken and some different questions to give us some data to see if this is something we want, you know, what benefits of coming to you. Are you cooking more as a family? Are you?
Yeah, because we always have one person that signs up, but we usually see you have 2 or 3 helpers in the kitchen with you. So
Yeah, we want to know who's cooking with you, and we want to know if it's helped you and your families cook more together. So, any other questions flying through there?
something about
Yes,
what it
Diane's.
the internal temperature, what it needs to be if you take
Yep.
the temperature. Oh, and that's a good answer as far as not letting the thermometer touch the bottom of the pan.
Yep. That's one thing they even said in our hot cross bun class is taking the temperature of your breads when you were cooking it. I will be quite honest, I've never taken a temperature of my breads, but I guarantee you I will be putting a thermometer in my breads every time I cook them from here on out. So,
Can I talk about how long that they can leave this? Can I leave this in the for all evening?
I would let it, okay, it's kind of like anything else before you put it in the refrigerator. You know, you're going to take it out of the cast iron. You're not going to store it in the cast iron in your refrigerator. You're going to crack your lid, let it cool down some, put it in, and like you can like reheat it tomorrow. I've microwaved to reheat it. You can stick it back in the oven for a few minutes to reheat it if you wish, but most of you might try it tonight and maybe eat it for dinner tomorrow. So just reheat it back up tomorrow a little bit in the microwave and it should be good to go. Look, I have a pan and a half that I'm going to be eating on for a week. Maybe I would not because it's an egg product. Maybe 3 days in the refrigerator would be good. But I would definitely take it out of the cast iron to store it in your refrigerator. If you have it in a different type, if you did it in a casserole dish and your casserole dish has a lid to it, it's not going to hold that heat in it as much as the cast iron might. So you're just not going to want to store it in the cast iron in your refrigerator. You should be able to freeze it, Diane says, very true. And everything in this, you could freeze it by serving size and pull it out. Take it to lunch. Make sure it's in a freezer safe container or in a freezer safe bag.
I have a interesting story for Megan. I know that she had mentioned that she had a student that you were talking to that said, oh, I'm taking this class. And they said, oh, we don't do anything like that with our extension office. And then he goes to church with my ag agent from our office. And he said, hey, they were doing that. And he was like, yeah, they're doing it together. So it was funny because he knew the ag agent and he went to church with him. So that was fun. Small world.
Small world, you're right. Well, I would really like to know that if you enjoyed this, if it's something different that you've not tried before, if you have a newfound love for butternut squash. I think Diane put on there somewhere it's high in fiber and vitamin A, and it's very good for you to eat. It's also got the orange color, and so hopefully, and it's a different way to try to get kids to eat something different than just giving them straight out. So if you put it in like an egg dish, you might get kids to try it a little more easily. All right, ladies and gents, I think there's a few gents on there and incognito cooking in the background with their spouses. Thank you. I'm going to hit stop recording.